Hey, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in the stream. Today, Africa's tech revolution. We look at the continent's homegrown innovations. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. As always, you can tweet her using the hashtag AJStream. Joining her on the couch today is Eric Osiakwan, the former executive secretary of the African Internet Service Providers Association. He's also a fellow at Stanford University, a World Bank consultant, and has co-authored 2 books on the internet and connectivity in Africa. And he's a good friend of mine. Eric, great to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on the show.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to getting your insight into some of these topics. We're going to jump right in. Remember, you can always keep up with the stream on Facebook. Throughout the day, we'll be posting links on our website, web-only content, and information about future shows. Just go to facebook.com/AJStream and click like.
Bonjour, I'm Nita Wiggins. I teach American principles and practices of journalism in Paris, France, and I'm in the stream.
Africa is undergoing a renaissance. The driving forces behind it are developments in information technology, but it's mobile innovation that's leading the way. Internet connectivity on the continent is limited. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, only 10% of people have internet access, whereas mobile usage is growing, and it's expected to double and reach 1 billion phones across the continent by 2016. These advances have given birth to African pioneered applications such as mobile banking. But the innovations have not been limited to communications technology alone. We've seen tablets, apps, various internet services also emerging. The powerhouses in this tech revolution have been Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, even Nigeria. But if you look at this map, you'll see it's not simply limited to those countries. As it shows, many technology hubs, business incubators, and hacker spaces are springing up across the continent. Compiled by Bongo Hive, this map not only shows their geographical spread, but it also reveals that there are 3 times as many hubs as were initially thought. So, why is this technological revolution taking place now? And what are the challenges facing this new breed of innovators? And frankly, where is this all headed? Here to help us answer these questions is Juliana Rotich. She's been named one of the top 2 women in technology by the Guardian newspaper in 2011. She's the co-founder of Ushahidi, an open source software venture that uses crowdsourcing via mobile phone and web reporting to gather and map information. She joins us from Nairobi, Kenya. Juliana, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you here joining us. So let's jump right in. I'm curious, what do you think is at the root of this seeming explosion of technology on the continent?
I think for a long time, African countries, there was stuff happening on the continent, but the connection, the cost of connection was extremely high. So it was really expensive to get online. But since 2009, when we had more fiber optic connectivity, we have broadband access, and now the problem of reaching out is it's not that expensive to get online and to tell your story and to show what you're doing. So I think it's just cool things were happening on the continent, but now we're hearing more of it, and we're discovering more talented people who are doing interesting things.
So Eric, she brings up a great point that there's greater broadband access. You were running the African Internet Service Providers Association for a number of years. Talk to us about how access has expanded.
Well, Juliana is right. So we've had the submarine cables on the beach, and then there's been considerable investment also in some cases terrestrial fiber. There's an interesting dichotomy between West Africa and East Africa. In West Africa, 10 years ago, we had a submarine cable called SAT-3. And connectivity in West Africa was an E1 will cost you, which is a T1 here, will cost you about $4,500. In East Africa, they were connecting by satellite because it was the only part of the world that didn't have a submarine cable, so it cost $7,500. Now, fast forward 3 years, suddenly, when the cables arrived in East Africa, Teams, Seacom, Easy, there was terrestrial fiber as well by KDN, by Kenya Pipeline Company, and the government-run one that drove in the capacity. So suddenly, the capacity got into the city and the price went down. Today, a new one in Kenya is about $200 or something like that. Juliana may confirm. But in West Africa, it's $1,000.
Really?
So it's a very interesting, and the reason why West Africa is $1,000 is because we didn't have enough terrestrial fiber that will bring that big capacity on the beach in. So if you take Ghana, for example, there are 4 submarine cables on the beach. In East Africa, there are 3. But still, the price in Ghana compared to Kenya is...
So what you're telling us is that you're actually bringing in the pipe to, when you say from the beach, it's coming in from offshore, undersea
Correct.
cables. But then there's the lack of terrestrial distribution to get across the continent, and that's stronger in East Africa.
And that's a trend that ISPs face still, because they then have to build that infrastructure to build it, and then they transfer that cost to the end user. So essentially, that makes it very difficult. But I wanted to sort of jump on the context of the question that Juliana was answering about the culture of innovation. I think that we cannot write off the mobile revolution that has happened on the continent. Just over a decade ago, there were more landlines in Manhattan than the whole of Africa. Fast forward 10 years, there are more cell phones in Africa, you rightly said, than the whole of the United States. So something has changed. And one of the factors behind this is economic. So we've seen steady GDP growth over the last 10 years, between 4 to 6%. Even during the financial crisis, Africa wasn't as affected. And we've also seen a very strong consumer growth in Africa. Today, Africa is leading the world. It's about 300 million. And this is about 16% of the continent GDP. So there is a fundamental change in the dynamics around getting with technology, getting with the goal, and being hip. So that is unleashing this sort of creativity and mindset among the young that suddenly they can see the world. They have access through cell phones, through the internet, and so suddenly a young kid can realize that I don't need to go get a job. I can actually start a company. I can build an app. This young kid is hacking code. He's writing Perl, Python. So suddenly this opening exposure is also a driving factor. The last point is that the barrier to starting a company have really gone down. Somebody in his father's basement has a computer 486 Pentium 1 or something, can start writing code, so he can start a company. So now puts on something, and there you go.
Well, this is really interesting because historically, when you're talking about, for example, extractive industries and resources, you had to have some company come in and take it out of the ground. But what you're mining now is out of people's minds. So that's an excellent point. And we're actually mining some information from our community, and they've got a lot to say on this topic. Malika?
Great way to put it. Eric, you mentioned several interesting points, and one of them was on the economy. So that leads nicely into this tweet from Buna, who says, Africa has many talented individuals to come up with many tech, but our first enemy is the economy. But before we get into that, Juliana, I want to post this, which is related, this tweet to you. Patience says, AJ Stream discusses Africa's tech revolution, but I'm in a power blackout. Electricity is one technical challenge in Uganda. And we're talking to you from Kenya, and your connection is quite clear, but that's not always the case when we have guests from the African continent. What are your thoughts on that?
So there's some people who actually think the grid is the killer app, and that's absolutely true, because you can talk about tech all you want. You can talk about mobiles, but without power and without electricity that helps people run these devices, then we're not getting too far enough. So there's an acknowledgement that that is actually an issue. So that particular industry is ripe for disruption, if you ask me, because there was a recent piece about a company called Indigo Solar that is trying to use the idea of pay-as-you-go solar power to provide access to people. So I think it's time that African countries looked at alternative energy, particularly wind and hybrid solar systems, to provide backup, because it's really, really expensive. But we have some African companies who are showing the way. There's a company here in Kenya called WinAfrique that makes cell phone base stations. These are the masts that you see. The power that when they use alternative sources of power, it reduces the cost of diesel fuel by up to 70%. So granted that the challenge is there, but the solutions are actually well within our reach. And that's, I think, the next frontier.
So I want to bring in another person that's pushing the envelope on some of these frontiers. Very interesting gentleman. You know, innovation and trade are both important factors in development. This guy, Herman Chinery-Hesse, fellow Ghanaian, he's been dubbed the Bill Gates of Africa. He's the founder of a company called Soft Tribe. And here's what he had to say about this question of trade versus aid in the development of the continent.
For starters, I have never heard of a country that developed on aid. If you know of one, just let me know. I know about countries that developed on trade and innovation and business. I don't know of any country that got so much aid and it suddenly became a first world country. I've never heard of such a country. So the track is wrong. That track ends to nowhere. It leads to nowhere. Only Africans can develop Africa.
Now, I want to actually get both of you in on this, but for our viewers' information, the three of us were all fellows at the TED Global Conference in Tanzania. Juliana, that's where you and I got to meet. Eric and I are from the same hometown, so we knew each other. But Juliana, I want to come to you first with this. I mean,
And
at
Herman
that
was there, by the way. Herman was
Herman was also
a
there,
fellow
and so was
at TED.
Emeka Okafor, who was here with us a couple weeks ago. Juliana, at that conference, this was one of the big divides. There were a number of people there. You had significant people from Google. Bono was there, and a lot of people were talking about kind of some of the aid issues that needed to be addressed.
Right.
And it seemed that there was a divide where a lot of the young Africans were arguing that no, what we need is not more aid, it's trade, as Herman is speaking about. What's your take on that question?
That is absolutely the way forward. And just to give you an idea that we currently still have a lot of challenges, we need to look at African countries as the market. Right now, the cost of a phone call from on the Safaricom network, to call the US, it's 10 shillings. To call India and China, it's 18 shillings. But to call within Africa, it's 30.
Wow.
So we need, we don't just talk about trade as empowering, but inter-African trade is going to be even more empowering. But currently we have last mile issues. Just look at that cost, really. We need to be serious about connecting ourselves. So TED Africa was fantastic because it brought together all of us that are here on the line right now. And we were able to collaborate later, and we were able to build things together. But there is so much more that we can do. And I think that's really the promise here. Aid is, Andrew Mwenda put it best when he said that it disincentivizes political leaders from being accountable to their own people. So they're accountable to the people who give us aid. So who's going to be accountable to us? We need to be accountable to ourselves. It's going to be a process, yes, but I think we're off to a good start.
Excellent point. I want to get your thoughts on it, but first we're going to get one more question in, and then we'll mix that up for you, Eric. Go ahead, Malika.
Exactly. This is a question from someone you also might know. This is a video comment. Let's play this here.
Hi, my name is Teddy, co-founder of Project Diaspora and co-host of the Digital Continent podcast. One of the things I find interesting about talking about technology and our innovations on the continent is the fact that the rest of the world really doesn't know what it is that we do, that there is another side to the single story of Africa, and that is our innovation. They find it alarming to say that, there's 500 million or more mobile subscriptions, and that, things like Ushahidi exist, and that we have innovation hubs all over the continent. I find it's really difficult to overcome that very negative single story about Africa. So the question would be, do we actually need to overcome that in the West in order for our innovations to be considered exportable? Or
I'm going to cut him off just right there to answer that question. Eric, would you like to tackle that?
So I believe that a majority of our effort should be bottom-up. I believe in bottom-up processes, but also you got to have an eye on the top, all right? Because, for example, if you take the energy sector, Juliana was saying, you need to have deregulation of the sector. Otherwise, it's very difficult for things to happen. The telecom sector had this big boom because the sector got deregulated. So I always keep my eye on the top. But the bottom-up processes of people creating technology by themselves and organize themselves into companies, to groups, in the bongo hives, in the iHubs, that is, for me, the most strong thing, and you need to spend more time looking at that. And so he's right, but I think that it's also a function of time. And very soon, a lot more of the stories you will see will be these kinds of stories. And we need to produce some big wins. We need to produce some success. For example, if you take M-Pesa, M-Pesa today is put mobile payment on the map and is put Africa in a different perspective. My grandma in the village, now I can send her money without necessarily saying it to a truck driver, etc. And she can use the phone, and now she can text me. Before she used to only talk, but now she can text me. So slowly these stories are going to change. But I'm a big believer in the fact that technology is a big driver for this change. And this is what, and there are different elements of it. It's not just a consumption, but we're also seeing a real interest in producing real technology that solves social problems as well as economic problems on the continent.
You know, this is another really interesting idea when you talk about solving problems, because it seems that some of these technologies that are being created on the continent are actually getting traction significantly outside of the African context. Juliana, Ushahidi is a perfect example. I mean, talk to us a little bit about the brand value of Africans building technologies that have global implications.
This is something that my colleague Eric Herman calls, and a few other commentators like G. Kofi Annan called reverse innovation. These are things that were tested or developed in Africa, like you mentioned, Ushahidi, which is a platform for crowdsourcing information. And with its cloud-based system, it allows people to crowdsource information, and even Al Jazeera has used it for the Uganda Speaks project. Now, the thing to see about reverse innovation is sometimes the export value or the export strategy, or how it ends up in more countries than just within Africa. It takes a lot for it to get there. Beyond Ushahidi, we also have this Mixit that is really huge in South Africa. It's better, I mean, it's bigger than Facebook. The key thing is it provides utility that other people find useful, and can actually, when you give people a skeleton on which they can flesh out what they would like to achieve, then you see people taking it, translating it, and using it in different places around the world. I think, so that kind of points to something around open innovation. You might hear a lot of companies try to bring up that, the point of open innovation, but really, it's very different to work in the open source industry, because open source industry completely empowers the person who is using the technology or appropriating the technology, and usually they can appropriate it better than if an outsider came in and said, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that. So the trend of reverse innovation, I think, is one that we hope to see continue. It doesn't always work. Sometimes some people have tried to replicate the M-Pesa model in different countries, but if they already have mobile money, if they have money systems that people are used to, then they're probably not going to switch to mobile money. However, there are opportunities within Africa. Again, if I could just go back to the point about inter-African trade, that there's still challenges around access, but the models that could work in one country could be tried out in others and appropriated and localized.
Well, Juliana, you mentioned Mixit, which is a mobile app, and actually the stream put out a call yesterday on Twitter asking for our followers to follow to finish the following hashlib. In sub-Saharan Africa, the most innovative app is, and one of the responses we got from Bilal Randari was Mixit. So I think that just kind of speaks to what you were just saying. But turning away from that, shifting gears a little bit, my question to you is, we're talking about dispelling stereotypes and the fact that people don't think of Africa when they think of startups and these kind of companies, but it's also something that you don't necessarily think of women in. You might think of American male white men in this type of startup. I'm wondering, as an African woman, have you seen challenges, and what will they be for other women that might want to come up in this?
I think in terms of dispelling the stereotypes, and there are many, one of the key things is I would actually just look at the data. If you're data centric, just look at the numbers. There are 300 million middle class Africans. That is not a basket case. That is a market opportunity. Seriously, just look at that number, and also look at the 600 million mobile subscribers in Africa, and also look at the GDP growth that we've had as an aggregate, which has been about 5% in the past year, in 2011. It's telling, and I think sometimes the thing with stereotypes is you can't let it get to you. You can fight them, yes, but I think if we keep telling our stories, and if we keep looking at the numbers and staying innovative and localizing and providing tools for people, that narrative will change. However, there is much to do to tell our stories in a strong way, to inspire others. And I think the role of women in tech is very important. Recently, Isis Nyong'o, Liz Ngozi, and actually Teddy, who offered that question previously, were at South by Southwest discussing this very topic. So I think it's really important to foster the next generation of startups. That's why we have the iHub in Nairobi and the different hubs that have come up around Africa, because we don't want just these two stories, Mixit or Ushahidi, to be the only stories coming out of Africa. And that is a very tough question.
Let me jump in really quickly there, Juliana, because we're coming to close of time, and I want to get, Eric, one more point from you, and that's quickly on this issue of fostering innovation. We talked a little bit about investment. What do you think needs to happen in the investment markets in order to cultivate more entrepreneurship on the continent?
Well, I think that there needs to be a mindset change, and the rich people in Africa need to start realizing that this thing is serious. And there's quite a really strong, innovative culture that needs to be backed with angel investing. I mean, I'm doing some of this by myself, and the other people like Herman that are supporting some of the startups, but we need a bigger pool.
So on that point, actually, I want to stop you there, because I had a very interesting conversation with Emeka Okafor about that pool, and I want to continue that in our post show. So I'm going to ask Eric and Juliana to both stay with us. Be with us at stream.aljazeera.com, where this conversation continues. But before we do that, let's go to Malika with some of the leads we're following.
A pullover sweatshirt and a pack of candy. That's what 17-year-old Trayvon Martin had with him when he was shot and killed near his home in the U.S. state of Florida. Netizens are calling for 1 million people to rally in search of justice for the teen who was gunned down by George Zimmerman, a self-appointed neighborhood watch leader. It's called the Million Hoodies March, and it's set for Wednesday in New York. The point? To show that a black person in a pullover or hoodie shouldn't automatically be marked as suspicious. More than 500,000 people have already signed a petition calling for the arrest of Zimmerman, who admitted to shooting Martin, but says he did it in self-defense. Our next lead takes a look at the buzz surrounding an Israeli Facebook campaign challenging tensions between Israel and Iran. The Israel Hearts Iran campaign includes pictures and messages of peace from Israelis to Iranians. Iranians, we will never bomb your country. We love you, reads one poster. Nikki Black on Twitter wrote, "This actually made me cry. The threat of war wears me out. I wish we would stop trying to kill each other." And lastly, a new music video from rapper Omar Offendum, a friend of the stream, is quickly making waves. It's entitled #Syria. Have a listen. Tell us what you think of those stories by voting them up or down at stream.aljazeera.com/leads. Derek?
Thank you, Malika. We're going to continue this conversation on African technology boom online at stream.aljazeera.com. On Wednesday, forced to marry a rapist. We look at the case that's led many in Morocco to question their legal system and a culture that values, quote, honor above all else. Send us your comments using the hashtag AJStream. In the meantime, we're going to leave you with more of Omar Offendum's song, #Syria.
And the people united will never be defeated. I was shot. Listen, the purpose purpose in these verses is to unify the masses. Humps up to Hesse, then yes to Damascus. City streets to countrysides, mountaintops to coastal tides. Muslim, Christian, women, men, and children, let's keep hope alive. Stand in solidarity with all your fellow citizens, peacefully protesting for an end to all the militants. Torture and imprisonment, murdering of innocents, proving that this lion leader's rule is illegitimate. Like father, like son, mobster, a president. This is who Halab and the Al-Az. We are all Hamza, we are all Hama, we are all Syrian.
Hey, welcome back to the stream. We're going to be continuing our conversation on African innovation. I want to come back to you, Eric. You were just making a very interesting point about the issue of investment in Africa and how you can use it to foster the building of more entrepreneurship. But we're getting this question here from @Mr. Mina, who's saying, would African economies benefit if governments jumped in and subsidized connectivity? And I want to expand that a little bit and say, what is the role of governments in this process of facilitating innovation?
Well, I think that governments have a role in creating the enabling environment. So whether it's connectivity, whether it's helping create tech, space or environments for people to hang out. But it's also very important that the involvement of government is very clear, and there are certain brackets that you put it, because you don't want government to be too involved. So I see government involvement more from the point of standing at the back and then looking at the big picture of what needs to be in place that the private sector does not have the resources to do. So for example, take some of the submarine cables. I was involved in the Teams cable in Kenya, and the Kenyan government was a very integral part of that. Kenyan government was a very integral part of the national backbone infrastructure that was built. The Kenyan government is now taking the lead in the Kwanza city, which is going to be a big technology city, 5,000 acres, which is about 60 kilometers out of town from Nairobi. And that's just going to be, and you need government to do some of those huge infrastructure projects. So there's a role for government, but we need to be clear on the limits of that, because there's a very clear intersection between what government is able to do and the point at which it then begins to stifle innovation.
Okay.
So I would say you need to bring government in, but you need to bring them at, you need to know the limits of how government come in. In terms of funding innovation, yes. I mean, the countries where the government resources, the funds that support entrepreneurial programs, business plan competitions, helps even put money into some of the startups. But it needs to be done in a way that drives a private sector approach. So for example, if the government is going to put together a fund that will invest in innovation, then it has to be a fund that is driven a private sector way. It's government money, but it needs to be run in a private sector way. And when it makes this investment, it must look to making this businesses sustainable. The idea is that, again, you have to move from the free mentality or the mentality of somebody's going to help me to do this. You have to look at it from the perspective of you're getting this money to help you become profitable. And that's the distinction that I always make between aid and trade. So at some point, aid is necessary, but you need to know where the limits are from getting you to a certain point, and then now you have to put your mindset that I'm not going to go back to aid, but then I need to now start empower myself to be able to trade, to be able to create a business, to be able to engage constructively in offering a product and a service that people will pay for. And that's very important.
I want to get Juliana's thoughts on that, because how do you shift that mindset? And particularly when, frankly, you have a global media culture that is focused on certain kinds of stories about Africa. We actually just got a very interesting comment on Twitter that says, this is from Ngum Ngafor, who says, the single story narrative is already changing thanks to African voices. I doubt Kony 2012 would have been questioned 10 years ago. I mean, I think that this is a great example. You have a mindset that it requires outsiders to come in and help Africa, and not necessarily to do so in partnership with Africans. To what degree does that mindset also permeate the continent? And how do you change that?
Just before I respond to that, just to add on Eric's point about the role of government, I think government also needs to think about when regulation is not a good idea. If you look at how M-Pesa grew, it grew so fast because there wasn't a precedent for it, and there wasn't regulation, and that allowed that idea to actually spread, and it got too big by the time they wanted to regulate it. So the idea, they've tried to replicate that model in other countries, but if you have a government that is overly regulating, then it becomes really difficult to encourage innovation. So you need to give people an open space, maybe not too open, but very empowering way in giving them money to actually build something. And when it comes to the single story of Africa, goodness, I do not understand why people have this single view of Africa, because there's 54 countries, 1,001 tribes, amazing diversity. We need to celebrate what all of us bring to the table in terms of creativity, and even within our culture. When you look at music, you have some really interesting interplay between African culture and sort of global culture. You have techno music that has African influence. So I think really we need to celebrate and talk about our stuff even louder, and really just embody this. And I think with time that will change. It's really quite unfortunate that there is that view of save Africa. It's so passé, in my opinion, and I think we just need to get on with building cool stuff.
Okay, Malika?
Well, Eric, I wanted to just flip the script a little bit here and read you this tweet from Flower Violet, who says, Africa's tech, the education system is our biggest worry. I just started a course on computer science. Can you shed some light on, is enough being done across Africa to make sure that students, when they come out of school, are prepared to, make a startup?
By the way, that's a really big problem. One of the problems with the educational system is by the time, if you went to the educational system to college, an entrepreneur, you come out looking for a job. And the other side of the problem is that there's even not enough universities or colleges for people. So there are people who actually qualify to go and they don't get to enter. And I actually have a story like that, where I actually qualified to go to college, but I couldn't get to college. And somehow I'm happy that happened. I'm glad, because I mean, a lot of the things that I'm doing today that I've been able to do in the last 10 to 12 to 15 years, I think that would have been on a different path if I'd spent time in college. That's not to say that college education is not important. I'm just saying that there is a role for it, and currently the system is not creating that mindset of entrepreneurism. We're seeing it a lot more from, we may say, survival instincts of guys who didn't go to college and they just want to do something. But again, but the education system needs to move to the point where, yes, it needs to produce managers, because you need people who are administrators, who are managers, very important. But also you need to create people who actually start companies, who take risks, who are very curious, who are adventurous. You need to be able to have a system that has a balance between the two. And again, that is changing in, there are new universities like Access University in Ghana, which is sort of looking at this particular stream, that we need to create graduates who will go out there and take on their own destiny and create companies. Or if they got into businesses, they need to be ready to change those institutions.
Well, how do you go about doing that?
So it's mindset, it's education, but it's also the environment. And again, if you step back, the element of people who've done this without necessarily, is sort of going through the hard knocks way of doing it. I mean, I've happened to build things like that, but also it's a function of, I think in my case, having also exposure. And in some cases, having a connection with people like Herman, with other like-minded people on the continent who are doing, and even not only on the continent, but even the diaspora. I mean, when I started connecting with Derek and I saw the things that he was doing and we started talking, it somehow empowers me. And I think the same way it empowers Derek to see me on the continent doing stuff. A little bit of my story is that I also had a mindset of looking at it from an African perspective, not just a Ghana perspective. So very early I started traveling in Kenya and East Africa and other parts of the continent, and got opportunities. Life presented me with opportunities, and I took them to work with people. And increasingly I realized it's also about people. You may not have the money, but certainly if you have the right connection with people and how to engage with people, you may be able to get a lot done without having a lot of money. But there's still also a role for money now.
So now what's your take on what Eric has just spoken about, Juliana?
I think there's, I agree. But what I would like to add is that the internet and the knowledge industry has gotten a bit more democratized. There is MIT open source, open courseware. I think there's something to. You had Emeka Okafor on your show. He tracks business, and not just big business, but also informal innovations in Africa. There's something telling there, because when you have someone bootstrapping and making something out of trash, or what people would see as trash, but making something useful out of it, there's a lesson there for African countries to look at. What if you could have an environment that actually shows people that they can make something? One of the key things around the iHub and other innovation hubs is providing an open environment where people can connect. So a developer can connect with a business person. There is a developer here in Kenya who won the Android App Challenge. When he was asked, what contributed to you winning this? He said, well, I went to university, but really where I got the skills and where I got to meet other people who helped me to realize this idea was at the iHub. It's my unofficial university. So you can pair the university system with open spaces, co-working spaces, and incubators to truly empower people to bootstrap, to figure things out, to hack things together. And the culture of me, you know, we've got a problem with not sharing our ideas, or because we're afraid somebody else will take it and run with it and profit from it. But I think looking at the way the technology industry has been progressing, one of the biggest companies right now, Google, provides Gmail for free, but they're able to monetize in other ways. That's instructive. I think we really need to look at those options that come from open source.
So, Juliana, you have the last word today. Thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate your insight. Also, Eric, pleasure to see you. Love the work that you're doing. Encourage both of you to continue. And Malika, thank you so much for plugging our community in. As you can see from this story, the actual tale of what's going on in Africa has many sides. We're going to continue this conversation, as always, online. You can find us at facebook.com/AJStream, or you can tweet us using the hashtag AJStream. We will continue to talk about African innovation. As always, we'll see you online.